Please take your seats quickly, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Tennis Weekly with Joel and Kim, sponsored by DownloadTennis.com. On today's book club,
we chat with former British No.1, Grand Slam finalist and tennis broadcaster John Lloyd about his new autobiography, Dear John.
Kim, we have our first book club episode of the season, and what a special guest we have in store today with none other than the former British No.1, Australian Open Grand Slam finalist and Wimbledon broadcaster, a man who I feel has pretty much been there and done it all in the world of tennis today.
Yes, I know. It's very exciting to welcome John Lloyd onto the show. John, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. I'm here in Florida. I'm coming over to England on Friday to start at Queen's, and I've been watching the tennis today from Nottingham. The grass looks magnificent there, I must say. The weather looked a bit suspect. I was a bit nervous seeing people in their ski jackets, and here it's 85 degrees, and I'm thinking, okay, got to get on the plane in a few days, but shall I delay it? That's the big question.
Well, there's been a lot of travel disruption, actually, flight cancellation, so might get delayed anyway. Who knows? Hopefully not. Hopefully you'll make it in one piece. The weather's not looking too good, but maybe the sun will come out for when you arrive in the UK. Are you're coming over for Queen's as usual? I take it your bread and butter.
Yes, I do Queen's, and then I do the 4 days of Wimbledon qualifying, which is always fun. I always love that event, and then I go obviously on to Wimbledon for the 2 weeks. So it's a busy month, more so this year, just because I've got things to do with the book and everything else. But it's a fun time. I actually like the Wimbledon qualifying; it's one of my favourites, to tell you the truth, because it gives you an opportunity to sort of wander around and see some new stars coming up, and it's I think it's one of the best deals in tennis for the public to go and watch that. I think it's a big bargain to go out and watch about 18 courts of some damn good tennis going out. These people are fighting for their lives to get into the main draw at Wimbledon, and I think it's fun to watch it and fun to commentate on it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a hidden gem, isn't it? You can get really up close. It's very kind of relaxed compared to the championships, which is just a whole different scenario. But yeah, we've just obviously had the end of the clay season as we're recording this day after the French Open final. Did you watch much of the clay? What were your kind of main thoughts on the last few weeks?
Well, it all comes down to really on the men's side, obviously Rafa, and watching him on Sunday, and John McEnroe. I was listening to John McEnroe, and he was saying about sporting achievements, and he was talking about some other American sort of superstars that have Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player, and I can't remember who else he mentioned now, but talking about them in comparison with Rafa's achievement. And I don't think that the 14 wins, whether he goes on to be the GOAT in terms of whether Novak eventually catches him up and goes past him, who knows? I'm not sure about that. But the 14 slams on one surface, it is absolutely mind-boggling. It's just you can't even. I mean, just to even play the tournament that many times is a feat in itself, and to have won it and to have done it in the way he's done it over and over again, and looking like he's 20 years old out on the court. It's absolutely I think it's the greatest sporting achievement by an individual on the planet ever in any sport. I don't see how anything can compare with that.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about how Pete Sampras won 14 Grand Slams total, and we thought that was a record that was not going to be surpassed or even got near anytime soon. And for Rafa and Nadal to go and do that on one surface, as you said, is absolutely incredible, especially with all the talk around his foot and injury, etc. It just makes it even more of a compelling story. And as you said, it's one of those stories that I think transcends tennis. It's impressive to everyone in tennis, but it's one of those ones that I think you stand up and take notice and you can appreciate just whatever sport you're into.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the French Open, obviously one of the 4 slams, and the slams obviously are all mega important. But if he'd have done that at Wimbledon, because Wimbledon is in a class by itself in terms of the media coverage throughout the world, the position it's got itself into, that people who are not really tennis fans know of Wimbledon more than anything else. No one would be talking about anything else. No disrespect to the French Open, which is, as I say, one of the slams, and it's incredible. I don't think it's getting the coverage that it should. I really don't. What he's achieved is absolutely beyond belief.
Yeah, exactly. And as much as we would love to talk about Rafa in this episode, we of course want to talk about your book, Dear John. It is your autobiography, and we've been with it the last couple of weeks now. Had a read through it, and we found it a real kind of interesting and insightful piece into the John Lloyd story. And if it's okay, we'd love to ask you some questions that we have put together in our script based on the time we've had over the last couple of weeks. And I guess the first kind of starting point for us is just talking about the book itself and the kind of the motivations behind it. Why did you kind of feel like right now was the time to go out and kind of release your autobiography?
Well, the release is a different matter, because, to be honest, the book was finished apart from the last chapter, which we did as a sort of an added part to it because of COVID. We'd finished this book a number of 2 or 3 years ago, and obviously it was just the wrong time to release it. It just didn't work out. It wasn't the right way, because Wimbledon, wasn't on for 1 year, and then the next year there was all the stuff going on, and it just wasn't felt. It didn't feel like it was the right time. So it's been done for a while, but I've been thinking about doing the book for quite a few years, to be honest. And I think the main motivation was, to be honest, the other book that I did many years ago when I was married to Chris Evert, called Lloyd on Lloyd, which was written by Carol Thatcher, was not exactly my most crowning moment in my life. It was a silly thing for me to have done. I was in a bad place right then, and the book was not a good book. It sold well, but it wasn't a good book, and I was disappointed with. Afterwards, when I read it, and I thought, well, why the hell did you say these things? Half of them are not even true. And what were you thinking? And I was in such a sort of bad place at that stage in so many ways that I always wanted to do something where the book, not just ego-wise, but just to sort of come up with something that, because I've been very fortunate in life in general, but particularly to be on the tennis circuit for as many years as I've been, and been in so many amazing eras of players, and I think you do meet a bunch of amazing people traveling around the world, and if you can somehow put that into a book in terms of making it sort of amusing and interesting. I always thought there was that I had a half decent book in me, and the first one certainly wasn't, and I think this one, we've myself and Phil Jones, who is obviously my co-writer, we've managed to make it sort of a half decent read that people hopefully will have some fun over. That was the whole plan. It was just something I felt like I needed to do, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think also it's something that I think will appeal to not just tennis fans, but you've got a lot of your off-court activities on there as well. So I think it's for all sports fans, it's a really good read. And what I particularly like about the way you structured it was the series of letters that you've written to your past self. So was there particular inspiration for like formatting it in that way, or was it just that's. Are you sort of often writing like letters, or how did you choose to do it that way?
No. I wish that was it, and I was no. That's not me at all, to be honest. I struggle with that. I try, but I'm not particularly good at it. But it was actually Phil Jones's idea, to be honest. When we originally got together and we talked about, the first thing was the title of the book. Before we even started, we thought about it, and mine was not original at all. My thought, but I originally thought, let's call it Lucky Lloyd, because I believe I've been extremely lucky in my life, and it was it was okay title, but it was a bit sort of corny, I suppose. And Phil said, that's fine, and we talked about it. He said, but what about an idea about because you've talked about things that you sort of wish you'd done differently, like we all do, and everything else, and he came up with the idea of Dear John. And as soon as he said it clicked in my mind. And I thought, I love it. I love the idea of it. So I can't take any credit for it, to be honest. That was all Phil, and I'm glad he did it, because I think it's just something a little bit different. That's all. Whether people like it or not, hopefully the response we've had seems to have been pretty good. So I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I like the kind of different kind of framing, particularly at the start and the end of the chapters, in terms of, as I said, how it adds a little bit of a different spin on it and adds that sort of bit more kind of personalization to it. I mean, just looking at the different letters that are in the book, are there any that kind of stand out to you in terms of stories and kind of are standouts for you and should be for any of the readers?
Well, I tried to make it. Obviously, it's about tennis, obviously, and about the career in it. But I'm not. When you're a great player, the McEnroes, the Connors, the Beckers, and so on and so on. You can write a book and you can talk about 90% of the book. You can talk about your matches and stuff on the tour and what you did at this stage at Wimbledon when you're in the quarterfinals and match point down and you won. Well, I was a good player, but a long way from being a great player. So for me, the tennis side of it, yes, I write about certain things, but it wasn't enough to write a book, and people would. I'm not a big enough name for that, or didn't achieve enough to do that. But I think that I've been very fortunate to be around, as I've said, so many people that have been there. I was married to one of the greats of all time, and I've been around a lot of them, and I've been privy to a lot of, I think, amusing, hopefully, stories, and so I think. Do anyone stand out? I think some of the off tennis stuff. I mean, I'm a big movie buff, and I think some of the sort of the little stories about movie stars and stuff that I've been around, and I always try and bring it back to tennis and how so many of them. Some of them are very nice people, but they're completely clueless about their tennis ability. And to be honest, if I didn't like them and they were nice, when I first started playing with them, I would have told them to take up a different sport. But I thought that probably wasn't the nicest thing to say. But when you play with them over the years and you know how to play with them and you hit to their strengths and make them look good, because you can hit the ball in areas that make them look good and don't make them look bad, they suddenly think that they're like 3 levels better. And some of the conversations that I've had with them over the years of people saying that they could beat this person and this person, and you look at it and you think to yourself, these are very intelligent people. And it's not just movie stars, it's people in business too that are these billionaires that own vast companies and are geniuses, and yet their tennis abilities, I guess maybe I'm too good a faker with them, and I fake them and make them look too good, and I get them close in games, and sometimes they make comments about things that are just, it's mind-boggling. So I tried to write some amusing stuff about some of those stories that I thought were, and some of them probably weren't too happy when they read about themselves with their egos, but tough luck.
I mean, who for you was a celebrity or someone you played with that you were surprised by their tennis ability, and whose was just stood out for you for all the wrong reasons? If you want to bear all.
Well, good tennis players. I tell you who was played well, and I was a bit surprised. And I think I wrote about it in the book about his. I gave a lesson for his 40th birthday party. It was David Duchovny from the X-Files and various other things. And he was actually pretty good. He was a damn good athlete. And I played with him. I was expecting him. I was expecting to pick up balls all day long with him as he was hitting in the back fence, on the rise, which a lot of these players you do that with. But actually, he kept it going, and he was so keen and ran around like a lunatic that we actually had a good game. Another good player was actually Matthew Perry from Friends, who I played with. Okay. I actually don't think I wrote that in the book now I think about it, but we did play, and he was actually, I think, a decent Canadian junior. And he was pretty good. And then you go for some bad ones where someone like the late Kenny Rogers, who I adored, Kenny, and he was very nice to me. I spent many nights at his home watching movies with various stars in his private movie theatre with, his own popcorn machine and candy machine, which was just for me blissful in life. But as a tennis player, I made him look half decent, and so much so that he ended up asking his pal Alan King, who was a famous comedian over here who died a few years ago, used to own the Alan King Tennis Classic, which was held in Las Vegas, which was nowadays would have been the equivalent of the Indian Wells or the Miami Masters Series. It was that big. And he asked Alan for a wild card into the doubles qualifying. And when I heard about it, I said to Kenny, "Are you in a coma? What are you thinking?" He said, "Well, no, I always play tough doubles with you." I mean, I was like, "Yeah, but but we're kind of having fun doubles." No. I think, and of course, he played in the qualifying doubles and lost 6-love in about 5.5 minutes. So you get people like that. But he was a nice guy. He just was delusional about his tennis. That's all. But hey, he could be worse in other ways. But he was a nice guy.
Oh, how the mighty fall! Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of ego flying around in
Yes.
showbiz, and obviously you've had your a very high profile marriage with Chris Evert, and a lot of, like you mentioned in the book, a lot of kind of the celebrity kind of aspect. You living out in LA, obviously coming into contact with lots of celebrities out there. Is there any one celebrity that you've met that you've just been completely in awe and like starstruck by, and you just your legs were like jelly just meeting them? Is there anyone that's kind of had that effect on you?
Oh boy, there's been a lot of them, to tell you the truth. Over the years, I was had a nice chat with Anthony Hopkins in Pacific Palisades with my son actually, and he was charming. I'm just trying to think some of the other guys that I've met, and some of the ones where, actually one which actually was quite an amusing story, I think, in the book was he was an idol of mine. I loved him big time. Was Sidney Poitier, who I was a huge fan of his, and actually I met him at a party which I describe in the book. It was for some prince of some country somewhere. I can't remember who it was now. Prince of Belgium. Do they have princes in Belgium? I don't know, but it was somewhere. I got invited to a party in LA, and I went there with a friend of mine who was married to Linda Carter, who used to be Wonder Woman, my friend Ron Samuels, and we were there chatting, and Sidney Poitier came up to us, and I was just in awe of him. And so Ron was saying it to me, because Sidney loved tennis, and he said, tell Sidney one of your funny stories or whatever. So I started telling him this story that I thought was amusing, and it wasn't too long. Sometimes I wander off a bit, but I think it was quite a tightly knit story, and I was just getting to the punchline, and I was literally just about to say it, and then all of a sudden another star came, and I can't remember who it was, to my side, and Sidney turned to him and chatted with him and just walked off. So I thought, well, stuff this. The story wasn't finished, so I carried on talking to an open space in the room with my friend
to be honest,
Ron and Linda.
That's what happens to me when I'm on the podcast, when I'm record with Kim, and I just feel like I'm in the same situation.
I carried on, and people in the party were thinking, this guy's a lunatic. He's talking to himself. But I didn't care. I had to finish my story anyway.
I mean, just moving on to talking about a big part of the book is about your the sibling rivalry with your two brothers, David Lloyd and Tony Lloyd. I mean, what was it like growing up? I mean, I'm assuming in a kind of tennis mad kind of sporting family. What was the kind of dynamic there, and particularly with you and David going through the 70s and the 80s, you were sort of kind of like the figureheads of British tennis throughout. What was kind of the relationship and the dynamic there as you were kind of growing up?
Well, it was great, I think, for all three of us, that we were all in the same sport and everything else. And for me, when I first started tennis at 5 or 6 or whatever it was, David was 12 then, and he was already, ranked in the top 5, I think it was, juniors in the country at that stage. So that gave me a target to sort of copy, and my younger brother was following me as I was starting to do well. So as we went up the ladder, so that was great. And then obviously my brother turned pro a lot earlier than I did, and then I followed him in, and he was actually sort of my guide to a certain extent. That he would learn me the ropes in some ways. But
did it spur you on?
Yes, it did. It definitely, because it gave me something to aim at, and I saw, and I went to watch him play at Wimbledon when I was still obviously a junior and coming up, and watching him play in front of all those people obviously was a huge incentive for me, and to have my brother as a top ranked player. I was very fortunate in that way, and he gave me a good something to aim at, really, and he took me under his wing. But although we did start to go to different circuits because I was coming up and he was already an established player, and then my ranking, got up, and then I would play different tournaments, and we would sometimes mesh together and play doubles. Obviously, we'd play Davis Cup, and he was good. He was dangerous though to be around my brother, because my brother. I remember the first time. Well, there was a number of times, but the first time when we were in Egypt, and I'd flown there on my own when I was young, and it had a disastrous journey and got there. And anyway, my brother caught me up, and we played in this tournament, and I played in the singles, and then we were playing in the doubles against these two Russian players that were built like sumo wrestlers. And my brother David, he's one of these people that he doesn't realise that he's not big, and he doesn't realise that he's not built like a heavyweight or anything like that, and yet he has no fear, whereas I have plenty of that. And so he got into an argument over line calls in Cairo, and we were on some outside court, no one around. It wasn't like there was a lot of officials to help you. And next minute, he's threatening for a punch up with these two guys, and I'm backing up, thinking,
were you running away?
Well, looking for the exit and where to go, and he's like taking on these two guys that could have just killed him in about 5.5 minutes, but 5.5 seconds. But he didn't care, and that happened a few times when we played in doubles. So I got used to it after a while. But then he did it once in Romania when we played in Bucharest against Ilie Nastase and Jon Tiriac, and it's not a good idea to get into a fight with a person who's regarded as a god in the country. And when you have 5,000 screaming Romanians that want to kill you, and my brother is going in for a full-on fight with Ilie Nastase across the net, with Jon Tiriac standing by, who on any day he would scare any person, let alone me. But David didn't care.
It sounds like these are your lasting memories of the Davis Cup.
Well,
you getting in a fight with players from other nations.
Yes, well, we had a few of those, but I have to say that I do have to say that if I'd have had a little bit of not punching out people, that wouldn't have been, but his desire, if I'd have put that a little bit more into my game, then my ranking would have gone up. I'm no doubt about that. If we could have meshed the two of us together, we would have had a half decent player. But he was an interesting character to be around, that's for sure.
And, you were speaking about, you've just sort of spoken about Davis Cup, and you guys obviously played really well together. You got to the final, 1978, lost to, United States. You've been there as a player. You've also captained Great Britain as well. I mean, what are your kind of standout memories as a player and as a captain? Because, I was reading about, when you were a captain, I was growing up, I was watching the team. It was Tim Henman and Greg Rosetsky, but at the same time, it felt like a little bit of like a transition period. And we did sadly go through a time where there just wasn't enough talent in the pipeline after, I feel like, being perhaps a little bit too reliant on Henman and Rosetsky for all those years. I mean,
yes.
what were your kind of your overriding impressions of Davis Cup as captain, and how did they kind of compare to, when you were playing back in the day?
Well, it became the sport itself became so much more professional than when I was playing. There were things that were done that were just, everything was more organised. It was the Davis Cup. I was very proud to be on the team as a player, and then to be a coach when my brother was captain, and then to be a captain. It was not the easiest thing in a lot of ways. It's a great honour, but I think my biggest mistake that I made, and there were plenty of them, but the biggest mistake I made, I think, was when I managed to sort of half persuade Tim Henman to come back into Davis Cup when he had stopped. And that year, when he came back, we had really a world-class team, because we had Tim and Greg, who was still playing damn well. I mean, he was obviously at the latter part of his career, as was Tim. And then we had an emerging Andy Murray, who was becoming a hell of a player, with Jamie Murray, who was also a top doubles player. So we had a good team there. We had a world group team there that if we'd have stuck together for another year, I think we could have caused some serious damage. Unfortunately, after we'd got them together and we'd done the hard work getting into the world group, Greg retired, and then Tim left. And so all of a sudden, I've got two world-class players gone, and I'm left with Andy, who was becoming a world-class player, and Jamie was becoming a world-class doubles player, but that was it. And unfortunately, I never forget when we won that match to get back into the world group, and I said in the press, I said, we're back where we belong. And that was a silly statement to make, because our team, after those guys left, we didn't really belong in the world group, to tell you the truth. And we were punching above our weight. And once they left, we were going to struggle. And I should have been more realistic with it and sort of almost given myself an out, so to speak, and said, well, hold on a minute, guys. We've done well with what we had, but this is a rebuilding kind of thing now. We've got to base the team on Andy Murray coming through, and hopefully coming through quick, and then we've got to find a second singles player that can win some matches at number 2, and also another doubles player, so that it's not always going to be left to Andy and Jamie. And we unfortunately, in my period while I was there, we never really got to there. I put in Dan Evans when he was very young. I didn't have much choice, and he's become a good Davis Cup player. But when I got him, he was a junior in essence, and he hadn't grown up yet, and I had to stick with him, and I don't blame him, but he was sort of in above his head, but there was no one else really to pick at that stage. And so anyway, the results were not good, and then obviously Andy was a bit dispirited by it all and all that stuff. As we started dropping down the divisions, fair enough, and so it became in the end a little bit of a disaster. But I still enjoyed it overall, and I was still very proud to be captain. But I would have loved to have stayed on for another year, just to have won a few matches, so that my record didn't look as bad as it was at the end, which obviously was pretty damning.
Well, is it something that you might be tempted to do again if the opportunity arose?
No. I'm well past my sell date with that sort of stuff now. I admire that people do, and plus, to be honest, and I hate to say this, but the Davis Cup now to me is not the Davis Cup anymore. It's
the Gerard Piqué Cup.
Yeah, it's very sad what's happened with it, and but I have to say, I said this years before. I said it before I was Davis Cup captain, that once you start getting, I equated it to a certain extent to, because I think a lot of people, it's good to always equate things to football in England, but I equated it to the FA Cup. When Alex Ferguson, the first time, when he pulled his players out and put a reserve team in the FA Cup, that was the beginning of the end of the FA Cup. I know it's had a little bit of resurgence recently, but it's still not. It's still managers still put in half of their players sometimes, and obviously in the old days the FA Cup was gigantic, and the Davis Cup was the same thing. And when I was commentating before I became captain, when you started getting 4 or 5 out of the top 10 each year not playing and picking, certain matches when they were at home and then they wouldn't go, it was to me the end of the Davis Cup, or becoming the end, and they had to somehow regroup and change it up. And unfortunately, what they've done, they've gone too far the other way, and now it's lost all the sort of fabric that made it the Davis Cup. And for me now, to be honest, I don't even bother watching it anymore. It doesn't interest me. It's done from what it used to be.
Just on that, how have players' perceptions of Davis Cup changed, do you think, since
completely
you played for it? Because it sounds like back in the day, everyone loved it, everyone was passionate about it, playing for their country. But do you feel like nowadays it's not as high on agenda as maybe
Absolutely.
like individual success and ranking points, for example?
Absolutely right. I always said, I said one quote, and Pat Rafter, who was then became captain of the Australian team, he said, I love your quote, and it was basically, when is it not a privilege to play for your country? And unfortunately, nowadays, I don't think it's a big deal for players anymore. Not all of them. I mean, I'm not putting everybody in the same, but I think for a lot, and whereas in my day, it was sort of the first thing you put down after the slams was Davis Cup, was, where are we going, who are we playing, what's the draw, and so on and so on. I don't believe it's that way now. I totally don't believe it. It's now, obviously still financially very good now, and so some players are playing it, but some of them that don't need the extra money I don't think the lure of the money. They make so much money these days in exhibitions and other events that they don't need to add the Davis Cup to their calendar, and it's going to die a death, I'm afraid to say, if it hasn't already.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about playing for your country, because the Olympics as well is another one of those competitions that I feel is also at a point where some players, would rather go chase ranking points than play for their country. And I think mixed doubles I don't think existed in the Olympics. I think when you were playing and then it got introduced, and I feel like you would have been chomping at the bit to again represent your country and play for the Olympics, play in the Olympics. But again, today it feels like a completely different kettle of fish.
It's all about making sure that your schedule is right. If it's convenient and the certain weeks are right, then players will play the Olympics. But it adds to an already added calendar, and I don't believe by any means it's in the first bracket of where a lot of players don't want. I mean, listen, some players, and Andy, and obviously Federer when he won the gold medal in the doubles, and I think for some it's obviously still a big occasion, but I do think there's a number of players that for them it's just another event really, and it doesn't add anything to sort of their resume in terms of what they want to achieve.
Yeah, I think tennis has so many events going on, but certain things have just become diminished, and obviously the Grand Slams still take precedence, which, obviously talking about Grand Slams, you reached the Australian Open final. You were up against Vitas Gerulaitis. I think at the time you were the first British man to reach a single slam final since Fred Perry, I think, had done. So it was a big moment for you. What were your kind of lasting memories from that match? You lost 6-2 in the fifth set, and you'd come back from two
thanks,
sets
Kim,
down.
for reminding him.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, it's funny you're talking about that match. I mean, look, first of all, cards on the table. It's obvious that the Australian Open wasn't the slam it is now at that stage, because it was over. It started on the 26th of December, Boxing Day, as we know. And a lot of players were like, do I want to go over there and prepare over Christmas?
Grass courts on Boxing Day. That feels quite strange.
That's when the Australian Open started. And of course, for me, so people would say, well, what about you? I'm going, okay, let me think about this. I have a chance to play the summer circuit in Australia for 6 weeks, right over Christmas, 80-degree weather in Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, Perth, or should I stay in London with the snow and the rain? Let me think about that one. I think I'll go to Australia. Much as I love England, there was no choice for me, and so I loved it. But we didn't have. I think we had 3 out of the top 10 players played the year that I got the final. So, all being said, if obviously Borg and Connors and those guys had played it, I would, unless there'd been some food poisoning around, I wouldn't have been in the finals. But it is what it is. I got there, and then I really should have won the match. And funny enough, someone just sent me. I hadn't seen it, or if I have, I banished it from my memory. But someone sent me a video of it the other day, and I've watched it actually. And first of all, it's actually funny that you look at yourself and you think, compared with today, you think, boy, that really was slow motion. I mean, I already knew the tennis was different. We had wood rackets. But I mean, it was so different. The grass was terrible.
I was going to ask about that. How does the grass in Australia compare to the grass at Wimbledon?
Well, the grass in Australia was awful. It wasn't as bad as, the worst was the US Open when it was at Forest Hills, when it was on grass. Those courts were disgraceful. The ones in Kooyong in Melbourne were poor in comparison with what we had in England. But having said that, all grass in those days was completely different, even Wimbledon. And I watched the match, and listen, obviously these guys today are unbelievable. But I tell you something, they would not, with the grips they have now, they would not have liked to have played on that grass at the Australian Open with balls flying at them low and trying to get their rackets with their grips under there and get the ball to flip over the net with the ball and odd bounces going, and it was skimming and skid through the courts. It was night and day in comparison with what the courts are at Wimbledon today, and what they used to be in those days. And Australia, as I say, was nowhere near as good as Wimbledon. But it was funny to watch it. But I should have won that match. I took my opponent, who was one of my better friends on the tour, who we practiced with I practiced with him almost every day during the 2 weeks, and the night before the finals, we were having dinner, and I said to him, Vitas, it's my first Grand Slam, yours. Are we going to practice together tomorrow before the finals? And he looked at me and he said, and I won't say exactly what he said in swear words, but basically he said, what, are you going to learn something from my game that you don't already know? And am I going to learn something? I know your game and you know my game. Of course we're going to practice. So we hit like an hour and a half before the finals. But what I didn't know was that he was suffering from cramp after the third set, because in those days they had a 10-minute break. And we were in different locker rooms because I was superstitious and I didn't want to change my locker. And I was in the locker room that was about 100 yards away from the stadium, and he was in the one underneath the stadium, and he was writhing around the place with cramp. And so in the fourth set, he started, it was very stiff, and he started to, I could see that, I knew that there was something, that he had cramp. And I just tried to change my game to adjust to that. And I was beating him fair and square before he had the cramp in the third set. I won the third, and I was on top of him. And I changed my game a bit, and then he kind of got rid of the cramp, played one good game to break me, and I suddenly panicked, and I never got my game back and lost in the fifth. I should have won that match, but anyway, if there was someone I was going to lose to, I'd rather have been him. But obviously, it would have been nice to have.
Do you know? I tried to find highlights of this on YouTube, and I couldn't find any highlights at all. So
well, I don't blame you, but I found them somehow. Someone sent them to me, and I watched it, and I've sent it to a few friends of mine, and they're all looking at it, going, seriously? And I went, seriously? That was me. That was me playing. We were running at 5 miles an hour. No, we actually ran pretty quick, but the rest of the game in comparison, there was no rallies, and the commentators were absolutely horrendous in those days too. Oh my God, not that I'm any great sport, but they were so bad. Oh my God, they no one had any stats. They didn't know any of that stuff. So they would just say, oh, that was a wonderful shot. And then on the next one, and then, oh, yes, nice day here and all this stuff. It was great to listen to. I loved it, but it was a bit of a load of rubbish, really.
Just talking about some of your Grand Slam successes in the mixed doubles, you won 3 mixed doubles titles with Wendy Turnbull, 2 at Wimbledon, 1 at the French Open. I mean, how did that come about? I mean, when you were growing up, did you ever think you would be a mixed doubles Grand Slam champion? How did you get into the doubles game? And did you ever think you were going to be a kind of a threat on the doubles court?
Well, I always loved doubles because I think in England, particularly, we grew up playing team games, team doubles, and a lot of doubles at the clubs and tournaments and all that. I love doubles. But to be honest, on the circuit in the men's doubles, there was a few years there where my doubles was actually pretty decent, and I had offers to play with some highly ranked players at the time. But to be honest, there was almost no prize money, and some of the people that asked me to play with them, they were arseholes. I didn't like them, and there wasn't enough money in the game. If I'd been playing today with the money they've got in the doubles, I'd play with my worst enemy to make the money they're making now. But in my day, there was no money, so my philosophy was, let's just play with someone obviously decent, but and have fun, and that's what I did. And the same with the mixed. I never really took it. I played with some really nice people in the mix. I'm not going to name their names because they'll then look and say, "Oh, I wasn't that bad." Well, they actually were, to be honest. But and so we played in mixed at Wimbledon. We had some fun, but I didn't take it seriously. And then Chrissy, when I was married to Chris, and Wendy, she was very good friends with Wendy, and I was good friends with Wendy, suggested, look, for us to sort of basically to get together and play. And Wendy had already won slams, and so she was a winner. And it was like, she wasn't in it to play for fun. She wanted to win the damn thing. And so that kind of made me go up into a different mindset with the mixed. And as I say, we won 2, won one in the French, and we should have won another Wimbledon too, actually, which I blew. And so, yeah, it was a great period of my time period. And people will say, well, yeah, it's a mixed doubles. Yeah, absolutely right. Is it as important as the other events? No, but it's still a Wimbledon and it's still a French. And I have to say, when I looked down at my parents when I was getting the presentation in the Royal Box, and I looked down at my parents who had sacrificed so many years of holidays to spend their money on us so that we could go around the English circuit and play tournaments. Believe me, I looked at their faces and their smile, it made it all worthwhile. So I don't take them lightly as well. And I've got them in my, the only 2 trophies I have in my apartment, actually, my 2 Wimbledons. And I have to say, though, I've been a bit lazy, and the silver has turned a little bit black, so I've been a bit
No,
naughty there.
need to get them polished.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, talking about when you were married to Chris Evert, how was that? Because obviously she was super famous, superstar, a golden couple of tennis, and playing at Wimbledon, especially all that pressure from the home crowd and all the kind of, I guess, the media circus around both of you. I mean, what was that like for you? Did you were you very distracted by all of that? Were you unable to kind of focus so much on the actual tennis because of everything going on off court?
Well, I certainly wouldn't say that about Wimbledon. That's my one regret. No, that's not my one regret. My one regret is that I never trained as hard as I should. I was lazy and I didn't work hard. That's my big regret, and I've said that in the book, and I say it now when I hit with people. Sometimes juniors, I tell them, just whatever you do, give it 100%, because then whenever you stop, whatever that level is, you've done it all. And I didn't do that until the latter part of my career. But being married to Chris didn't hurt or help my Wimbledon singles. I was bad at Wimbledon the singles. I did not take the pressure of being one of the top British players, sometimes the number one, sometimes number two, and never adapted well to it, which was a weakness in my character. I should have. And the ridiculous part was, it's not like I was a non-pressure player, because there's pressure in Davis Cup when you're representing your country. And I came through some big matches, and I came through, the US Open, which was still a slam, and the Australian. So, but for some reason at Wimbledon, I never played well. So I'm not. That is in no shape blame, if there's such a word as being married to Chris. On the other side of it, the other part of my life with her, when you marry someone who is a megastar as she was, I was fortunate that I was not in that league, but I was already well known in Britain when I married her, and so I was used to being out in the public's eye and all that stuff. So it wasn't like I went from one thing and completely didn't know what was coming. I knew what was coming. I didn't know it was going to quite be as big as it was, but I knew it. So in some ways, I was able to kind of know what was going to happen, and you put your ego at the door if you marry someone who's obviously a much bigger star than you are, and is much wealthier and all that stuff. And if you don't want that stuff, then don't marry the person. And Chris was very good with that. She never in any way tried to sort of talk down about my career or the money side, any of that sort of stuff. Never came into it. The marriage was 50-50, and that's the way it was, well, apart from the end of it. But so she was great in that way. It was really down to me. I started spending more time going to Chris's tournaments, trying to do both, playing my tournament, often losing the first round or second, and then travel over to where she was playing, work her out. And this is, again, not being sexist, it's because she was a great player, but training with even the number one player in the world in comparison with playing against the guys is night and day. And so gradually what happened was I was going back into the men's tournaments and I was a step slow. It's just, that's just the facts. And I started losing more. And instead of, making my mind up one way or the other, I kind of let myself do it. And my career started dropping down. And then I started spending more time with Chris. And she needed me to be around. And she wanted me at tournaments. And I got great pleasure in watching her win big tournaments. But my own career suffered. And in looking back at it, I shouldn't have let it go that far. And I should have been a bit more proud. Not proud, that's the wrong word. But I should have spent more time on myself in that way and with my career. But having said that, both of us going at it at 100% wouldn't have worked. So the bottom line was, and I said in the book, we married probably 10 years too early. While we were both having a career like this, it's very difficult to do that when you're both on the road, on the circuits, different places. It doesn't really work. But we made the best of it, and we lasted 8 years. Wasn't the end of the world, but anyway, it was a big experience being married to someone that famous. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that balance, because even nowadays I don't feel like you get big, sporting couples. They're quite I feel like a rare thing, and perhaps it is due to that feeling that you can't both be 100% at the same time, and there's always got to be some sort of give or take.
Yes.
I mean, you spoke earlier about Lloyd on Lloyd, your first book. It sounded like you've had regrets about it. I mean, can you just talk to us a bit more about that? Because I was sort of reading about it, and it sounded like it was like the peak of your fame in the in the 80s, and you got this opportunity, I imagine, to I guess make lots of money with a book to capture the moment. And I feel like you went for it, and in that moment you were like, yes, this is great. But it sounds like ever since, have you sort of lived to regret it?
Yeah, I wouldn't have said that the reaction you had at the end about yes, that never really happened. The money was, see, the thing was, to be honest, the money side of it, we had an agent, obviously, and the agent comes up with this thing and said, oh, there's this talk about this book and you'll make this and that. And I was like, to be honest, I've never been a businessman. And the figures that they were talking, just with being with Chris alone, I mean, we played a couple of mixed doubles. There was one kind of quite famous one called the Love Doubles that was at Battersea Park, where we played against Bjorn Borg and his wife Marianne Simonescu. And the money, the figures that were being, and not in comparison with today, but in our day, the figures were astronomical. And then, the agent would call up me sometimes and say, look, we've got this offer for Chris to go to Japan. And Chris would say, I don't want to go there. And I saw the amount of money offered, and I was thinking, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I'd swim the channel for that, and I can't even swim. But so money wasn't really a factor. So when that deal came along, it was just a question of, Chris said, do you want to do it? I said, do you want to do it? Yeah, I'll do it. Let's do it. Okay, we'll do it. And Carol Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher's daughter, was the author, and I think it's fair to say she was very pro Chris, and listen, I was a big boy, but I was an idiot at that stage, and I sort of I let myself get talked into it. It's my own fault. I don't blame me rather than myself. But I was in a bad place then. I was regretting my career and stuff, and then just started talking about some things that were just not really me. And so I come out of it like an absolute bumblebee. I mean, I looked like an idiot in it, and it was just not a good book from my side. It just wasn't written in the way that. Doesn't mean everything should be pro, of course. I mean, we've all got weaknesses, but it really was, a lot of it. Friends of mine said that's not really you, and I was like, you know what, you're right, but it's too late now. So it just kind of washed off me. It was just a mistake that I made,
Hopefully our listeners won't be suddenly going on Amazon to try and see if they can get their hands on a copy of that.
Please don't.
Do not buy it, everyone.
No, do not.
Yeah, I mean, post your playing career, obviously you've moved into broadcasting. Was that something that you maybe always wanted to do, or you were kind of interested in? And how has that been since you first started? I think early 90s you first started, was it with HBO, I think you said in the book?
Well, no, to be honest, I had never thought of myself in that role at all. And it was pure, this is a terrible thing to say because it's not, and I don't mean to say it's pure luck because it wasn't, but in terms of, because what happened was it was a tragedy, but the late Arthur Ashe passed away, and Arthur was a friend of mine, and he worked for HBO. The luck that was involved was that my second wife was very friendly with someone else who was friendly with the HBO producer of sport, and she, and so this other friend said to my ex-wife, John should go out and see if he can get a job with HBO and commentate. And I was like, she asked me, I was like, really? I've never done that before. And so anyway, the funny part of the story was that Jimmy Connors and Vidas Gerulaitis, who was still alive obviously at the time, we went out to dinner one night. This was about 2 months before Wimbledon. I don't know why we were together, some tournament somewhere, and we were chatting about summer plans. And both of them said, "I said, well, are you guys going to Wimbledon this year? What are you doing?" And Jimmy said, "Well, HBO have offered me the chance to do the commentary there, but I'm turning it down. I'm going to do something else and whatever." And then Vidas said, "Fun enough, they've offered it to me as well. And I'm turning it down. I'm doing something else, playing this and that or whatever. And I'm not doing it." I went, "Oh, okay." And then, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing nothing." And then about a month later, I got a phone call from this producer, and he said, "John, would you have any interest in maybe trying out to commentate?" And I said, "Well, for Wimbledon?" And he said, "Yeah." And I went, he said, "Look, he said to me, let me put my cards on the table. Our first two choices are Jimmy Connors and Vidas Gerulaitis, but you're a strong third." And I'm thinking, well, you don't know this, buddy, but they're turning you down. So I'm thinking, wow, I may have a shot here. So he said, you've got to do a screen test. And I said, what the hell's that? And he said, well, you'll do some commentating with your co-commentator, a guy called Jim Lampley, who's famous for doing boxing commentating in the States. And you'll commentate on a match and in a studio, and we'll pretend like it's real, and we'll do everything that we do in a normal match, and we'll see how you are. So I said, okay. So I went along and did it, and I was bloody awful. I kept talking when they kept talking in my earpiece, and they would say, okay, John, we're going to...
It sounds like us at episode 1, if I'm being calm.
Okay. Well, it was an absolute disaster, and Jim Lampley, very nice guy afterwards, said, yeah, I think it went very well, and I think it'd be good to work with you as an Englishman. And I'm thinking, what a bloody liar he is. And then all of a sudden,
it sounds like this is what you say to those celebrities when you coach them on the tennis court.
Exactly. Take up, get another job. Don't even think of it. But what happened was the guy came back to me, and obviously now it was getting close to Wimbledon, and he then made his phone call to Jimmy Connors and Vitas and was stuck with me. So they got me, and for the first week or so, it was just horrific. But I somehow got through for a few years, and then HBO got cancelled with tennis, probably because of me. But after about 5 years, and then the BBC opened up, and I've been with the BBC ever since. So I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some great people, and I'm still hanging in there somehow. It's mind-boggling.
And you must have commentated on, thousands of matches since you began. And is there? I'm sure you've got lots of memorable moments from that. But is there one particular match that was just absolutely outstanding in your memory that you worked on, or any particularly like the funniest story that you can think of from your time in the box?
Well, there's a couple in the book, but it would take too long to tell them, and they're a bit raunchy. So I don't know if that would work out. I don't know if your audience is R, PG, or G. I don't know what your rating is. But there was a couple of funny things happening commentating that was, was mind-boggling. But in terms of matches, and actually, by the way, there have been a couple of times where I've actually nodded off in matches. I don't know if that quotes, but and I'm sure the BBC would be very happy to learn that. But one time was with Chris Bradnam, my co-commentator, and we were doing the Olympics actually from Beijing, but we were actually doing it from a studio in Shepherd's Bush with the BBC, and they put us in this blacked out studio, literally blacked out, and it was 3:00 in the morning while we were commentating on these matches. And I'd flown in I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and my flight got delayed, so I had no sleep, and we're commentating on a women's doubles match, and it was 3:00 in the morning. First of all, I'm thinking, with all due respect, who the hell's watching this at 3:00 in the morning? It was a women's doubles second round or something, and it gets towards the end, and it's the longest match in history of doubles. It was the worst match ever, and I'm trying to stay awake, and I'm doing the Mr. Bean thing. I'm holding my eyes open. I'm pulling my fingers back so it hurts.
We've all been there.
And Chris is Chris is one of these guys, a great guy, but he can commentate. And he can just watch, like two flowers sort of grow when they don't grow, and he'll still make it interesting to talk about. He's one of those, and he loves tennis, and he could just waffle on in a good way. And I nudged him. It got to a tiebreaker in the third, and I nudged him just before the tiebreaker. I said, Chris, I put the mic off. I said, look, I'm trying. I think I'm going, but I'm trying a bit. Just keep your eye on me. And so this tiebreaker started, and it was like 1-1, and I suddenly fell asleep, but not in a foot. I snored. And a ginormous snore came out, and then Chris nudged me, and I woke up. And you've been there. I'm sure everywhere you've been jet lagged or whatever. You're in a place, and you wake up in a hotel room, whatever the hell, and you don't know where the hell you are. And I'm in this pitch black room, and there's a TV on with 4 women. I don't know where the hell I am, and it's 2 on the tiebreaker. And I start to talk, and Chris nudges me like, "Shut up!" And I'm still half snoring. I don't know where the hell I was. So I got through the match and scared the living daylights out of me. Oh my God. And I'm sure the viewers, I don't think there were that many viewers, thank goodness, because I've still got my job, but it was not nice, not pretty.
Yeah, I can imagine you've got a fair few stories to tell. I mean, before we kind of close on this episode, I've got to ask you, you support Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club.
Yes.
I mean, I cannot detect for the life of me any sort of Midlands, Brummie sort of accent.
No.
So can you level with me? How has that happened? Yeah. And also, I've been reading on Wikipedia as well. Andy Murray also apparently is a Wolverhampton Wanderers fan because of you.
Well, I'm not sure if he is anymore. I go quickly to the Wolverhampton, but when I was Davis Cup captain, I was very good friends with the late Rachel Hayhoe Flint, who was the women's cricketer, and she was a director at Wolves. And so we went to a match while we were playing in London. That Wolves had a match against, I think it was Fulham actually, a game against Fulham. And I got him an autographed, the T-shirt with the name on the back, and they got one specially made. And so I think after that, I think he still maybe watches the results. I don't know, but I don't know if he's still a fan. But for me, it was just silly, really. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, and all the boys in those days, everybody supported a team. I'm from Leigh-on-Sea near Southend, but Southend were, I did go and watch Southend a lot, but I wanted a team in those days in the first division, now of course Premiership, and everybody supported the obvious ones, the Man United, the Liverpool, and I liked, and I still do this, I liked gold. I do like gold now. I don't know why. I've got to think about gold. Not that I've got much of it, but and I like the gold cost. The gold uniforms. I loved it, and I fell in love with that. And I've been a supporter now for almost 60 years, and I've followed them down to the fourth division upwards, and I've been to games, and I when I'm in the States here, I don't miss a match, whether it's 5 o'clock in the morning when they come up here with the time change or whatever. I watch every single game, and if I'm on the road, I find a pub and I watch every single game that they play. I'm on there every day. I'm on their website finding out if there's any transfers. quite sad,
Amazing.
Really. But
yeah,
that's awesome. I'm sure there can't be many Wolves fans out living in the States, so I think you're quite unique.
There's not many, but I did go into when I was playing in a senior tournament at the Albert Hall, and Robert Plant was there from Led Zeppelin, and I went up to him, and I'd never met him, and I said, "You and I have something in common." And he's looking at me, and he's thinking, "Can't see what that could be, son." And I said, "You're Wolverhampton supporter." He said, "Yeah, I'm a director." I said, "Yeah, me too." Well, I'm not director. So we had a chat about it. So Robert Plant.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we've got a few questions from our listeners before we close for today. So thank you to our listeners for sending these in. This one's from Caroline, who's asked, if you were playing tennis today, John, who would you most like to play against of the current generation of players? And also, who would you potentially like to play doubles with? So any initial thoughts on those?
Well, the person I'd love to play against would be Roger Federer. Because and there's no way taking away anything from Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal and all that, but to me, with Federer, when I would commentate on him in the days when he was winning everything and quite comfortably, and people would say, "Well, yeah, but it's boring watching him win 6-2, 6-3, 6-2 or whatever," and I said, "Nah, it isn't. I'm sorry," because when you commentate on Federer, he'll always do 4 or 5 shots in a match that no one else could even have the imagination to try, let alone pull off. And for me, he's just the genius of all time. I would have loved to have played him and just watched him hit balls past me and just looked at him and just clapped while he did it. So for me, that would have been the best. In terms of, did you say doubles?
Doubles, yeah.
Doubles. Well, the doubles players today, they're a different breed. It's a different sort of sport to what I played. I mean, the one I would love to have played, I did play with him in the seniors, but to me, the greatest doubles player that ever lived was John McEnroe. So if I'd have had a choice, I would have loved to have played with John McEnroe at his peak, and then that would have been beautiful. But today, I mean, there's so many good doubles played, but they're all sort of, there's no one particular one. I would have loved to have played one of the Bryan brothers, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we also had another listener question from Linda, and Linda asked, what's the one thing you would change in modern tennis today?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many. There's so many. I to be honest, and I'm going to get a lot of criticism for this, but I always do, but I don't care. If it was in slams, I would change it from 5 sets to 3 sets.
Okay.
Because I do this a lot on Facebook, and a lot of the ex-players that I'm friendly with go nuts at me, and they say, "Oh, you're an idiot," and it's only physical. That would make the slams no different from everything else. Well, number one, that's a silly question, because the slams will always be different from the other tournaments, even if it was best of 1 set, because it's a slam, and so the importance of it's irrelevant whether it's 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5. the importance is still going to be the same. And with best of 5 these days, when I've tried to tell people of my era and before, and when we have these conversations, the physicality now is 5 times different than what it was in my day. And these guys, you can't be playing these 4 or 5 hour matches and then recover and do it again. It becomes, in the end, if you're not careful, it's not so much about the skill. It's whether they're marathon runners. I mean, the physicality, of course, it's important, but you still have to be in great shape. Look at Nadal playing against Zverev. They hadn't even finished 2 sets, and it was over 3 hours.
Yeah, that was a bit.
You can't. This is why these injuries are coming in. And then people say, yeah, but then there'll be more. Then the other argument I have, people say, yeah, but Nadal was down 2 sets to love, so therefore he would have lost. No, he wouldn't. Not necessarily, because if it was 2 out of 3 sets, the whole that whole nervousness of the attitude of the players in 2 out of 3 changes. When someone is serving in the second set and to go 2 sets to love up in best of 5, it's a different feeling than if he's 1 set up and it's 2 out of 3 and he's serving for the match. That's a whole different pressure. And the best players would still come through in the majority of cases, whether it was 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5, because they're just better players and they're mentally stronger. And I think it'll be better for our game, because we have to look in the future of our sport. And I'm sorry to say, whether it's good or people's attention span now is not 5 hour matches, 4 or 5 hour matches. I'm sorry, for us to attract the viewer that might watch it, they're not going to sit for 4 to 5 hours. And TV rules. We've got to get more viewers. We have to make this a more streamlined profession. 2 out of 3 is plenty in today's tennis with the way the men play, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with regards to the attention span. You know, when I'm at a slam, I like to kind of court hop, because I couldn't sit down for 5 sets and in one, I need to go to the loo for one thing and all of that practical side of things. So no, great answer. One last question for you, John. This one's less controversial. We are a very British podcast, so we're all British here. So we ask this question to all of our guests, wherever they come from, and that is, how do you take your tea? I mean, you've been living out in the States for years now. Do you still drink a nice kind of classic English cup of tea, or are you on to harder stuff like coffee?
I'm going to probably, turn off of many people that have watched this that thought, oh, okay, he's not such an idiot. Now they're going to think of me as a real idiot. But I've never drunk coffee in my life. And tea, I'll have tea if someone makes it for me, like when my mum used to make it now and again. But other than that, it doesn't interest me. Terrible to say. Okay. Now and again, I'll have breakfast tea out here, but doesn't really do it for me, to be honest. I'm more of a, which is not good for you, but I'm more of a Diet Coke man, to tell you the truth. Isn't that sacrilege?
Okay. Oh well. Interesting. Wow.
No, well, that's fair enough. But we have had some interesting responses when we've asked that before. I think some very detailed.
I think you're the first one. I think you're the first one to say you're a Diet Coke drinker, though. So fair play. But John, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show, talking about Dear John. For any of our listeners who are interested in purchasing a copy for themselves, where is it available?
Well, you can order it at your bookstore. It came out May the 30th, but you can also get it on Amazon as well. So you can certainly order them. There's plenty of copies available, I'll tell you that.
Yes, listeners, we'll make sure to put a link in the description if you wish to purchase a copy of Dear John. Honestly, me and Kim have been reading it over the last couple of weeks, and it's a really enthralling and exciting read. So we would certainly recommend it. John, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's been absolutely wonderful, regaling tales of your life. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. It was great.
And listeners, remember to subscribe to Tennis Weekly on whatever device you listen to us on to stay up to date on all the action from the tennis world. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all good podcasting platforms out there. You can also listen to us on the downloadtennis.com app. And if you like what you're hearing, then make sure to leave us a rating and comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
And you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Tennis Weekly Pod. So do let us know any thoughts, feedback, and comments on those social channels. And if you prefer to email us, you can do so tennisweekly@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out our website, www.tennisweekly.co.uk.
And we will be back next time at Tennis Weekly HQ for our latest tour catch-up as we enter into the grass court season. So I hope you can join us for our next episode. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from me and Kim, and we'll see you again soon.